In this video session, we're going to walk you through how to code basic CSS. So let's go ahead and get started. Inside Dreamweaver, on my welcome screen, I can go underneath Create New, and then choose CSS. You can also come up here to File, New, and then choose the CSS from here. If you're working with a text editor, all you need to do is simply make sure that you save your file name with the extension .css. Now in this session we're not going to specifically cover all the different types of CSS that you can code. For that I would send you to one of my favorite websites, the w3schools.com. They have an entire section on CSS with all the various different types of codes that you would need to style backgrounds, style your text, lots of different things. So it's a fantastic resource and I would recommend that you go there for that information. So in this session what we do want to cover is just the basics. And one of the things that you need to ask yourself is whether or not you are coding for an HTML tag, whether you are coding an identifier, or whether or not you are coding for a class. And we'll show you how to do each one of these three. Now, whenever we talk about HTML tags, what we're talking about are those common HTML tags that you see in your code. For example, your body, the paragraphs, unordered list, list items, and so forth. Those common HTML tags that we normally use whenever you're making your web page. So whenever we do that, all we do whenever we start coding those selectors is we simply type in the same name as our HTML tag. So for example, the body tag. That's it. You don't have to do anything else special to it. Just hit space and then use your left curly bracket. And I'm going to go ahead and hit enter a couple times to put a space, and then the right curly bracket. And the reason I do this is because I want to make sure that I go ahead and close this off. You will often hear me refer to these as containers. Think of your opening tag as the lid and your closing as the base or the bowl. You want to make sure that you always have a lid and a base and all your content goes between those two. It needs to be stored safely away. And so this is what allows me to do that. And the other reason that I do it like this is because I do like to code vertically. It allows me to see all my different styles in a vertical nature, so it's easier to go through and troubleshoot or to change. So let's say for this particular tag, I want to go ahead and give it a background color so that my entire web page will be gray. In between the opening and closing tag for this selector, I would simply type in the declaration property that I want. And in this case, let's go and give it a background color of gray. And then I'm going to hit the colon to separate my property from my declaration value. And then I would type in the color. Now, as you can see, I'm using Dreamweaver, and the minute I begin to type in a color, it automatically brings up the color chart. And I can use my arrow key to go around it. I could also choose the color wheel if I want. I also have access to a RGB slider and different types of things that I can choose from to give me those color names. Now for those of you that don't have access to Dreamweaver, or if you want, you can always also pull these colors from a web source. W3 Schools has a great color chart inside their website. They can name it by colors, which will give you the hexadecimal as well as the RGB colors. If you happen to have Photoshop and you're designing something inside there, you can also pull the hexadecimal from that area or the RGB. Just if you have a color selected inside your swatch, wherever you're getting your color from, just come down here and click on your color, and whenever you go to your color breakdown inside your color picker, you can find the RGB values here or the hexadecimal right here next to that number sign. So just another place that you can find some color choices. So I'm going to hit cancel and go back to my Dreamweaver. So for this particular case, because I'm going to be using a hexadecimal, I'm going to type in the number sign and then CCC, because I know that's gray, and then the semicolon. The semicolon is great to use to help declare that this is the end of this property. I declared it, finish. Okay, now if you only have one declaration property, you really don't need to use the semicolon. However, if you do have more than one, you do have to have it in there to separate it from the next property. So for example, if we were to assign a font family, that's my declaration property, I'm going to use the colon, and I'm going to choose a font family of Arial, Helvetica, and Sans Serif, and then I would close this off with the semicolon. So again, if you have more than one declaration property inside a CSS style, you've got to make sure to go ahead and use that semicolon. Okay? So now that is how you code for an HTML tag. And to be honest, regardless of what you're coding for, whether it's a tag, identifier, or class, This process is the exact same. From the left curly bracket to the right curly bracket, all the stuff in between, you code it the exact same way. The only difference there is how you code the selector. So as you can see for the HTML selector, there's nothing in front of the name. It's just simply the name itself. Now let's go ahead and hit enter a couple times to create some space, and let's go ahead and code an identifier. Identifiers are marked by the number sign. Now whenever you type an identifier, you can give it any type of name that you want. It doesn't really matter, but I highly recommend that you give it the name associated with what the code's going to do. For example, this identifier will be called container because it's going to contain the entire web page. Some people use wrapper, whatever. It doesn't really matter what you name it, but I highly recommend you name it for the function that it serves. Now, something to note about identifiers is that you can only use an identifier with that name one time on the web page. So a lot of times what you'll see these used for are whether defining a certain section on a web page. For example, some folks have a section called navigation. Some may have a section called footer. Things that will only appear once on a web page. That's great for identifiers. For what I use them for, I basically use them as structural elements. They're what I use to create my layouts. So I have containers, or things like these. I may have something called the banner. May have an identifier for the left content, for the right content, whatever. But remember, you can only use them once with that specific name on a web page. So we've got our identifier labeled. Let's go ahead and do our left curly bracket and then our right curly bracket. And then let's go ahead and add some code. And as you can see, for this particular code, we have a declaration property of width. We've put in the colon to separate the property from the value. And then, of course, we've closed it off with a semicolon because we have an additional property that we've added, which is the margin, colon, and auto. The auto is the value. So far what we've coded is a common HTML tag and an identifier. So now let's talk about the next one, the class. So I'm going to hit enter a couple times to go and code the next one. Now for a class, classes can be used many times on a web page. So you can assign these to multiple sections. It doesn't really matter. So let's say, for example, you have a navigation up at the top and you have navigation at the bottom. You could create a identifier that says navigation top and then an additional identifier that says navigation bottom. But if they're going to both have the exact same characteristics, why not just create one class that you can use twice? And so to create a class, what we would do is we would put in a period, and then we would type in the name of our class. And again, you can use these multiple times, as many times as you want inside of a web page. And again, I'm just going to hit space. There's my left curly bracket and my right curly bracket, and then I would code all the things in between. So here we have a color of red, and I've chosen to use the RGB breakdown for this just to kind of show you. And then of course it's got a font weight of bold. So HTML tag, we have an identifier, and then we have a class called navigation. Now, one of the things I do want to point out real quick, if you're using Dreamweaver, you'll notice that this code, the tabbing and the spacing is not the same for everything. To clean this up, if you will go up to your commands, drop down to apply source formatting, this will fix all that for your entire page. Much cleaner. And by the way, you're going to want to use that tool pretty often. So again, one more time, we've done the tag, we've done an identifier, and we have done a class. Now, two other things to consider. Let's say, for example, you have the exact same styles for two different elements. Do you have to code those separately? The answer is no. You can actually have one style for multiple elements by doing the following. Let's say, for example, we want all of our paragraphs and all of our unordered list to have the exact same color and the exact same font size. Well, what we can do with that is, since these are HTML tags, just put in the name of one tag, comma, space, and then the name of the other tag, and then of course your brackets. Now of course you can use these with identifiers and classes as well. Just make sure that you separate them with the comma. And then what we can basically do is go through and code those with the proper declaration properties and values. So again, what this indicates is that all my paragraphs and all my unordered lists are going to share the same color and be the same font size. Just make sure that you separate each selector with the comma. Now, one last thing. When you look at this code, we know that all of our paragraphs are going to have this dark gray color and are going to have this font size of 13. Okay, that's going to be the standard for the entire web page. But what if I want all the paragraphs inside the container to be different? What if I want them to be a different color or have a different font size? How would I code that? Well, what we'll do is we'll start off with the name of the identifier, put a space, and then put the HTML tag that you want it to be associated with it. And then we simply put in our brackets and then assign the new properties and values. Okay, so for example, while all the other paragraphs will have the default gray and font size of 13, the paragraph within inside the container will have a font size of 24 and whatever color this is. So, I don't know, I forget. So anyway, what if I want both the paragraphs and the unordered list to have the same characteristics? Again, just put a comma afterwards and then type in the element. Alright, and one of the last things I do want to mention real quick is, you know what, let me go ahead and apply that source formatting to clean all this up, is usually whenever you do create your CSS, I mean, this page is going to get really long, and whenever you have to go back and troubleshoot some things, digging through your CSS can be kind of a pain, figuring out where stuff is. So one of the things that I get in the habit of doing is trying to put them in alphabetical order. So I would highly recommend that as you go through it, and as your lists get longer and longer and longer, is you simply put them in alphabetical order to help you be able to find what you're looking for just a little bit faster. So something to think about and something to do.